So once I found out that I was in a shipping war, I had to look at who was the, or what policy, and who was in charge of the mechanism that created that shipping war. And what I found was an apparatus of joint tenancies worldwide. One, the main one, was through the Universal Postal Union in Bern, Switzerland. It was the head clearinghouse for all fee for freights for mechanics for contracts on planet Earth. I sat down with them for a 3-hour conversation on June 18, 2003, where the establishment of who I am as Sovereign Postmaster General of planet Earth was clearly laid out. Their words were that I had created my own venue in a now time scenario, and no one on the planet had ever claimed that venue. No government construct, no postal construct, no sovereign, no one. And that I was the only one was solitary. And I got a letter when I went to the Vatican, got a letter from the Vatican saying that I was a solitary condition of the state, was the exact words that they used for my postmaster generalship to run all banks and militaries on planet Earth. Because on June, one of the strategic places that I had to go, which had joint tenancies on control of people, was the Vatican. When I went to the Vatican, it was on for 3 days from June 18th, or no, from June 16th, 17th, and 18th. I left there the morning of the 18th of 2003. During that time frame, I had mailed myself around the world without a passport over to there to prove a point. One, to prove that I was Postmaster General Sovereign of planet Earth, and that I had tactical knowledge on how to move myself from point A to point B as a piece of cargo. During that conversations at the Vatican, they brought in about 40 cardinals to walk around St. Peter's Basilica and St. Peter's Square with me. And they asked me many, many questions. And so I spent 3 days fielding questions, answering questions, and walking through the mechanics of what I was witnessing on the hieroglyphics of what was going on there. They had symbols for sexual connotations. They had symbols for banking. They had symbols for directionals. They had symbols for the suspension of time. And so all these things were relevant in my discussions, which were classified with those cardinals. The Secretary of State's office went under contract with me. Now, David Winkle Miller was there with me, but he was only allowed to be a witness on the contract. He was not allowed in the room when I wrote the contract and booked myself in to be Sovereign Postmaster General and to run and be Commander-in-Chief of all militaries on the planet, because I had proved to them that I comprehended the mechanics as a global Commander-in-Chief of military movements. Just to even get to there, I had done some things. I don't, for purposes of this documentary, most of that is classified, so I can't get into that because I don't want to put that into the public sector and have other people trying it. That wouldn't be fair to the people that they would be giving directions to. So for that, we'll just keep that on the side. But they were satisfied with my capacity to articulate navigation of cargoes, being it militaries, being it sequesters, or what they would call acquisitions, and to move things from point A to point B. At the end of that, they took me into the Secretary of the State's office at the Vatican, where I sat down for 3 hours and wrote up a contract. I autographed the contract, did a commercial book in with both hands, put all their stamps and certified seals on those contracts, autographed the stamps, autographed all their embossments and all their insignias and all this and that. And then the Secretary of the State came in. They called him Angelo Sodano. His real name was Michael. And David Winkle Miller, who also was a witness to that, and autographed the contract for me to run all the constructs of banking on planet Earth, and military movements and functions and consular posts and anything to do with shipping, because I had given enough closure that I had superior tactical command control knowledge, firsthand knowledge of what it took to be that person. And I am that guy. So basically the navigation of all treaties, codes, statutes, contracts on planet Earth, if they don't have my thumbprint and my autograph on the contract, they are not valid for movement. The other locations would be, the main one other than the Universal Postal Union was the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, because that's the capacity for a country to register its language, grammar, to create sums and differences, communication, differences, solutions, settlements. Because I was the sovereign Postmaster General, Commander-in-Chief of the District of the Columbia, on January, for my filings and the federal government vacating in 2000, November of 2000, on January, I waited the 1 year, 1 day timeline, and under maritime salvage showed up on January 15th, 2002. The first function for me as Postmaster General was to go look at the surveillance of what condition the money was in. So my first task was to walk into the U.S. Treasury. As I walked into the U.S. Treasury, they were flying a flag out front that was not a flag anywhere on planet Earth. It was a flag, mumble-jumbled flag that meant nothing. So I walked in the doors and I gave them a command to take down the flag and put up the correct Title IV 1 to 1.9 dimension flag. Of course, they put me under custody, and I put them under citizens' custody myself, and they took me up to the 4th floor of the U.S. Treasury, where they brought in the head of U.S. Secret Service and 4 Treasury agents. I explained to them and gave them closure that America was a verb on the money and it doesn't exist, in violation of Title 18, 1342, mail fraud, in violation of Title 18, Section 1001, fictitious grammar. They concurred with that. I then turned around and said, you've got to take down the flag because I am the Postmaster General of this country and the correct flag must be flying at the U.S. Treasury. They brought in the head of U.S. Secret Service. They kicked out all Treasury agents. In the room was the head of U.S. Secret Service, David Hyperwin Miller, myself, and 2 others. The head of U.S. Secret Service asked me to come over to the window. I went over to the window at the U.S. Treasury. He said this to me: "It is the corporate policy of the United States government to hire stupid people. That way the people way up on top are not accountable for what the stupid people do to the citizens. You are the Postmaster General, you are the Commander-in-Chief, but nobody will believe you." He goes, "Look, are you satisfied?" They took down the flag that meant nothing and placed the Title IV 1 to 1.9 dimension flag and hoisted it up the flag standard. And that was my first function as Commander-in-Chief and Postmaster General in the District of the Columbia. Later that day, I went to the fraudulent grammar corporation called the Federal Reserve. As I walked in the door to the Federal Reserve, I had a judgment, which I have a court performance from the United States District Courts out of Casper, Wyoming, dealing with tax concerns since the IRS was kicked out of the United States in 1999. What that means for the citizens out there, in the year 1999, you were all tricked and fooled. You were told you will no longer sign your checks over for your taxes over to the Internal Revenue Service. Why? Because the Internal Revenue Service has been kicked out of the United States. Oops, one small thing, they forgot to tell you this. They then told you to make out your taxes to the U.S. Treasury because the bankruptcy was over and the IRS ceased to exist in the United States. But because I know the secrets and I know how to order the courts, command the courts open, I commanded the court open to get the performance for the payment of the taxes in the correct communication, parsing, syntax, grammar. There are no laws, there are no rules for correct communication, parsing, syntax, grammar for a performance of the payment of the taxes. Therefore, the federal courts concurred with me and put me on vacation from the performance of the taxes. We filed that in compliance with the Federal Reserve under their foreign banking statutes to register judgments with the foreign bank. The foreign bank being the U.S. Treasury, which it was registered, and the other foreign bank in the venue was the Federal Reserve. When I got to the Federal Reserve, I met with some underlings there. I served in my IRS judgment. So I went on in there and gave them closure that they're at some point and someday they will be using correct communication, parsing, syntax, grammar for the movement of the commerce, or they will simply be leaving the District of Columbia. And we took care of that this last Christmas. It was a Christmas present that I gave to this country at 2018. So I'm not going to give closure about that at this point, but hopefully it'll be in here. Anyway, sat down and they were very upset about it, but they sat there and they listened, and I walked out of there that day. And that was my function, my first two functions in the District of Columbia in 2002. I rewrote and disqualified the World Bank Charter, the International Monetary Fund, the International Monetary Fund Charter, and rewrote a 300-page contract for charter vessel called the Global-Banking-Constitution. In that contract, it dealt with the mechanics of movements of policies of foreign monies in and out of the District of Columbia. Because I am Postmaster General and sovereign of the District of Columbia, I went to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank in the District of Columbia. I sat down with their attorneys, put my charters out on the table. I placed a sack of silver and a sack of gold on the table. When the attorneys read the contract, they started shaking profusely. I then walked around the table, grabbed the gold, grabbed the silver, and said, "And now I'm paying myself to be this person, since all of you have birth certificates and have no authorization to be in this land." They immediately picked up the phone at both venues. I did it the same day. And they proceeded to call security to throw me out of the buildings. Strong-arming me and pushing me out of the buildings, I went very peaceably. But they were put given closure, on notice, that they were no longer to be conducting business on that land. Within the same time frame in 2003, on February 20th, 2003, they were having a United States Postal Reform meeting where they claimed the supposed Postmaster General of the United States was scheduled to speak. They put this in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, where they had 8 senators there, C-SPAN. And so what I did is I sent a surveillance team in front of me to set up and put cameras and videotape me coming in and the causality of consequence of the actual Postmaster General being in the building. When I arrived in the building, I saw none of what I'm going to describe to you. I sat down in the second row. My surveillance team was behind me, and they told me a story of how the Postmaster General, supposedly, of the United States Post Office saw me and took off a running with U.S. Secret Service on the run, running out of the building, screaming and yelling, "I can't even be in the same building as me." My security team at that day jumped in the elevator with them. And the Postmaster General, John Potter, was yelling at Secret Service, "Get me away from Russell. Get me away from Russell. He's here, he's here, he's here. I can't even be in the same building as this guy." Said it was a real crack-up. So I didn't get to see any of that. But as that happened, David Winkle and Miller jumped up in front of the Senate Judicial Committee and charged them all with fraudulent grammar and charged them all with treason against we the people. They shut down the C-SPAN cameras and everybody went running out of the room. It was quite a commotion that day. And that was at Hotel Washington, kitty corner in the U.S. Treasury off of Pennsylvania Avenue, right next to the White House, right behind the White House. My next function that year was the same day. We went to the Secretary of the Navy's office where we met with Seaman William Ball at Hansford T. Johnson, who was the Secretary of the Navy at the time, who then autographed our Global Banking Constitution, autographed the stamps, and became enjoinder and signed a lease with us for the Title IV 1-to-1.9 dimension flag for the Secretary of the Navy's office. That same year, I mailed myself around the world without a passport. Mailed myself to Interpol first, which was in Lyon, France. Rewrote the Interpol Constitution, for it was 100% fiction, which means that all words in the Interpol Constitution were fraudulently conveyed with adverbs and adjectives and pronouns, creating false and misleading statements in violation of Title 18, 1001, creating a mail fraud situation in violation of Title 18, 1342, and 1343. They met with me. Of course, they met with me once again. I did not have a security team apparatus. They surrounded me with a SWAT team. They pointed guns in my face, and they brought their representatives down because I could smell their fear and I could see it all over them. For I was there, and they know it. 3 days later, I mailed myself into the Vatican, sat down with this many cardinals and the Secretary of State's office, formulating a contract for myself as Postmaster General and Commander-in-Chief, as well as World Bank banker, to conduct and control all contracts globally for bank constructs under foreign commerce guidelines, which I wrote a constitution and a charter for. They joined with that constitution and charter and autographed the stamps with me, making me a solitary condition of the state for a now space banking, a now space tactical command control of all militaries on the planet. For all militaries, when you go into your military, you're not actually working for the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, the Army. You first must go get your registration with the post office, for you are a postal warrior. When you get your registration with the post office, then you go into your branch of the military service. What does this tell you? It tells you when you get mustered out and charged out of the military, that if you did not go back to the post office and nullify your postal registration with the post office, you can then be brought back in, because under knowledge and negligence you lack the due diligence and education to vacate your usury with that service. So all military employees do not work for the Navy, they do not work for the Army, they do not certainly work for the Marines, they don't work for the Air Force or the Coast Guard, they work for the post office. Why is this? Because you are in a shipping war and you are fighting shipping battles. And I am the Commander-in-Chief of all of that. If you have any questions, please contact me. I will gladly give you the necessary closure to move your cargoes out of harm's way. Okay, in 1996 through 1999 to early 2000, I was working and corresponding and calling the Navy JAG office, dealing with the shipping lanes, because I was studying the shipping on planet Earth and the movement of Navy vessels and the mechanics behind that. And the Navy was asking me grammar questions simultaneously. So for every question that I would ask, they would ask a question about grammar. So it was very interesting. And later on down in my life in 2003, I saw the fruits of my education when I was educated in the Navy. So we'll get into that along to the short. But in the short run, they were asking me about what it took to make a prepositional phrase, what the verb of thinking was, what was the syntax of the first two prepositions, what location were they? They were a cause and a consequence, then the verb of thinking and a possession authority after the verb. So they had questions about styles of syntax and now time scenarios in grammar. They had questions about flag etiquette, what I had done with the flag, David and myself. So we were on the phone, or I was on the phone probably twice a week for about 2.5 years real steady, just asking them questions because I had the right to ask because they were public servants. As public servants under a private corporation with the post office, I had the position and the function to ask the right questions, to learn about navigating foreign vessels in foreign waters, flag etiquette, how to check into port authorities, how to put ships under commission, those sort of mechanics. I learned a lot, tremendous amount, but I also got to teach a tremendous amount about grammar and syntax. During that time frame, when it was all said and done, when I had mailed myself around the world to the Vatican and to the Universal Postal Union, they actually had a Navy computer programmer meet me in Charles de Gaulle Airport when I cleared through customs because I didn't have a passport, and he approached me with the phraseologies that I had taught in the Navy JAG 5 years before. And the phraseologies that he used was, they have a vessel in the foreign seas, and he's got a possession, or he's got a cause and effect, and a possession and assignment in his prepositional phrases in a sentence structure. And they asked me, what is he missing? I says, well, he's missing the verb of thinking, but the thinking will never change the condition of the act, for it is in fact a fact. And he says, very good, say you're him. And then we went off and had a conversation over a couple drinks for a couple hours about some classified stuff. So I saw that the more I taught, point being, the more I taught about grammar, the more I could see it mirror towards me under the attraction, because what you put out there reciprocates back in this world under manifestation. So I saw the hard work and the diligence with Commander Kaufman, and I seen it used in my benefit when I was in France. So, you know, it was an education. I learned about salvage and towing and service fees and docking fees and wharf fingers and all kinds of different maritime lingo, which made me a really fine judge. Oh yes, and when I saw the end of the third and final bankruptcy coming, and we got the flag registered in at the United Nations, and then we turned around and I filed for a position as Postmaster General and Postal-in-Inspector for the U.S. Postal Service in Washington, D.C. And I filed in solo by myself on those contracts with my number. And when they vacated the District of Columbia on the Florida Chads, the night of the Florida Chads, my contract was the only one because I had autographed the stamp, and they vacated their time and space. I was the only authorized federal sovereign in the District of Columbia. I was actually a global sovereign at that point because of the shipping lanes and tentacles that come out of Washington, D.C. under the shipping ley lines through London and through the Vatican. But that did give me the tactical command control of the District of the Columbia. And with that, everything else, all the vessels there and all the corporations there simultaneously must come into correct communication, parses, index, grammar. What I saw coming was under international bankruptcy laws, the United States had filed an international bankruptcy in October or on November 2nd, 1929. They gave 3-day notice before that on October 29th, 1929, 3-day notice that they were going to shut down the banks, and that's when they were forced into filing another international bankruptcy on November 2nd, 1999, or 29, sorry, which was the stock market crash, just a ruse. The benefactors of the stock market crash were the banking families around the globe. Yeah, and so that kicked off the third and final international bankruptcy, and they tried to switch it, and I'm sure they're going to try to put themselves back into bankruptcy, but it doesn't change the conditions of the fact and the performance of myself maintaining the continuance of the evidence on my number and my slip for Postmaster General. And the third and final international bankruptcy come to an end on September 17th, 1999. Okay. So the United States government was it filed an international bankruptcy on November 2nd, 1929. Under the 70-year moratorium for international bankruptcy, it was coming to an end. But the rules and the regulations for the bankruptcy were the Constitution of the United States, and the trustee of that was the president. So I knew the federal government somehow was going to have to vacate the presidency of the United States and create some kind of scenario to fool the citizens of this country into believing something that is and was not. And that was the Florida Chads.
Stand by. CNN right now is moving our earlier declaration of Florida back to the too close to call column. 25 very big electoral votes in the home state of the governor's brother, Jeb Bush, are hanging in the balance.
They had everybody out there looking at the computer, looking on your television, sideshowing it, punching these and counting these little notches in these voting slips. And that's because the post office was shut down. They had no flag, they had no constitution, they just had a bunch of people sideshowing it with their television. They were closed. It's over. And I am the sovereign, I'm the Postmaster General, and I'm the one in charge of the District of Columbia, for the movement of mails, cargoes, vessels, monies, values, persons. In November and October of 2012, I was ordering the courts open in Washington, D.C. at the United States Court of Claims. The United States Court of Claims sent me an engraving embossment of a all-seeing eye in a pyramid. When we did the research, David Eifenwinkle Miller and myself, on what that hieroglyphic meant, there was no value to it. What that means is we went down to the U.S. Post Office, we went to the United States Department of Engraving, and there was no cognition of the certified seal with an all-seeing eye into a pyramid for the United States government. They sent us to the Philadelphia U.S. Mint at the U.S. Mint and Treasury for the Department for the U.S. government, for the United States Treasury. We went there and spent 3 hours with the Department of Engraving. At the Department of Engraving, they said, this symbolism is for an inside Illuminati cult. We have no jurisdiction in its function, and even why it's on a contract for the United States judicial system. It's a code. So we took a mirror and looked at it backwards, and it told us to go to the Philadelphia Benjamin Franklin Post Office. On December 20th of 2012, David Eifenwinkle Miller and myself, Russell J. Cullen Gould, walked into the Benjamin Franklin Post Office. Now, the museum was closed at the Benjamin Franklin Post Office, but we needed to get in there and read technical documents that were on display in the museum. So I gave the front desk my passport, told them I was Postmaster General. They ran it. I sat there for 30 minutes. At the end of 30 minutes, the lady said, "Can you come back in an hour and a half?" I said, "Sure." She says, "Yeah, the janitor has to open this up for you." I said, "Okay." So I came back in an hour and a half, and they opened up the Benjamin Franklin Postal Court Museum, or Postal Museum. And they opened up all the glass casing, and I was allowed to go into Benjamin Franklin's Postalineums, which is his private land survey books, because he was into the survey of the lands for the weights and measures for England and France simultaneously. So he was Postmaster General of Canada, and he was the Postmaster General of the colonies here in the United States. But before he was Postmaster General of the colonies in the United States, he was just a postmaster, surveying lands and setting up sea lanes, ships channels, so that people can engage in commerce for navigation of cargo from point A to point B, all the way down through the shipping from Canada through the northern, down into Pennsylvania. And in the book, his personal book, he borrowed 1.6 million francs on July 1st, 1775. Now, nothing becomes law for 1 year, 1 day, and there's a thing in banking called 3-day rescission, 3-day notice. So 1 year, 1 day, 3-day rescission is July 4th, 1776, the day of the slaves. This is the day they teach, the public judicial system teaches the citizens of our country that this is the day you were free. It was actually the mirror and opposite is the day that you became in slavery. However, the principles and the functions of the contracts people went into joinder with, because they didn't comprehend exactly where their usury tenants were, and they didn't set up their own ship's channels, and they adopted Benjamin Franklin's and the Founding Fathers' characteristics of their commerce wars, of their shipping lanes. The citizens didn't know anything about that. How could they? They were busy just trying to survive, eat, build homes, come to a new land. and fraudulently capture Native Americans. That was all done under Ayling, and the reason why that is because the usury of Benjamin Franklin and the wars and the armies to capture the Native American people were all done under Ayling, which means that the government was already under usury, under bankruptcy. Bankrupt people can't contract. So why are bankrupt white men capturing free sovereign natives? This is fiction. This is wrong, and this is fraudulent. And the natives are sovereign here. And sadly, they have not been told or taught how to be sovereign. They have it in their spiritual, cultural faiths, but they don't comprehend how the Wasuchi, the white man, has sprung the trap on them. And that's sad. So on December 21st, 2012, David-Wynn Miller and myself, Russell-J. Cullen Gould, opened up the Benjamin Franklin Postal Court for the authorization of ships' channels through this land. And it's been up and running under 1 year, 1 day timeline on December 22nd, or actually 25th, 3 day rescission, 2013. Was a valid court for function here on this land. On December 21st, 2012, David-Wynn Cullen Miller and myself, Russell-J. Cullen Gould, authorized and opened up the Benjamin Franklin Postal Court. The Benjamin Franklin Postal Court is the venue that the Constitution sits in. It's the venue that the flag sits in. It's the venue that the court sits in. It's the venue that the survey for land for load recovery sits in. And it's the venue that the citizens can come to for the right of the grievance. And that's the Federal Postal Court that David-Wynn Cullen Miller is speaking about. And that's the actual Federal Postal Court of what used to be the United States. And it's the nativity location of the Post Office for Land Survey in the geographic North American continent. Because Benjamin Franklin was a Postmaster General also of Canada simultaneously, creating joinder for the North American continent. And I've reopened it and authorized it with my authorizations, with my continuance of the evidence, with my flag, with my sweat equity to never surrender the flag, so that citizens and corporate employees can have safety within a now space scenario. And that's their flag, that's their constitution, that's their postal system, that's their shipping lane for their ships' channels to come in joinder with, not Washington, D.C. I would like to now shift to the 3 city-states, the ones that have the ultimate power for control and the enslavement of planet Earth. I'd like to start out with London and some of the mechanical things that they have done. First, going back to the Spanish Armada War. What that war was about was the capture of who controlled the time and contract. That's Greenwich. When they won the war, they slid the calendar that everybody follows, the timing, to Greenwich under the atomic clock. They then created the International Maritime Organization. And now in the International Maritime Organization are the policies of functions dealing with the registration of foreign vessels. Now, foreign vessels are classified as contracts. They're classified also as ships. They're classified as anything that is not in nativity to that parent land. So it covers all shipping routes. So all port authorities are on file with them. All harbor masters, all lighthouses, ultimately come down through the International Maritime Organization. This controls banking. The time in banking is linked over to the Vatican on their rituals. On all roads lead to Rome, dealing with their obelisk triangulations and the things that the manipulation of their symbolism in their secret societies, that they have created a monopoly to control the function of the contract so that they are in complete dominance against the people, until I came along, of course. But this is how they enslave mankind, and this is how they use the time of the past and the future and the Gregorian calendar to control their stock markets for payments, to make sure that the citizens don't have any now space. So with the quantum grammar system, we use now space, stepping out of the time. So it's a very valuable thing because you can control your now space and not be caught up in their time. So it's very important, and the Vatican is a co-conspirator with that as they regulate and monitor the commerce, the contracts that are moving around the planet through their Gregorian system that they have set up, and through their symbolism on the flag standards, the buildings that you walk into, the hieroglyphics that sit in your local treasuries, in your local Port Authorities, Department of Transportation for the shipping, through the post office. Most of the hieroglyphics are on file through the Vatican, which they have done ceremonial functions to give the spirit, or the volition of that hieroglyphic to be a controlling factor subliminally in our lives. And so they've changed definitions, like the definition see, S-E-E. Most citizens would think that it means to look at someone. But in a legal connotation, it means to look through the Pope's and the diocese authorization, the pontiff's authorization. So you don't have, you go into court and the judge will stand up and go, you'll have people talking this and that and saying, the judge will go, well, you people can't see what you're doing. And everybody's like, what do you mean we can't see what we're doing? But he's not telling them the definition of SEE means to look through the Pope's authorization, where he's functioning under the Basilica, the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, to keep everybody in a tomb. That's why you have judges' chambers, so you can go into the tomb. We have claims of the life to move our citizens out of the tomb. So this is how a controlling factor that they use their court systems through the Department of Transportation, through the bills of the ladings, to control and navigate you from point A to point B. London and the Vatican are a big part of those roads. The other function of power is the actual physical force, which is the Vatican gives the commands through London to move the militaries, and the big function of command is in Washington, D.C., is the Pentagon. And they too are engaged in authorizations that they believe that they're bound to. But because of the end of the bankruptcy in 1999, the Pentagon has lost the joinder with the Vatican, the joinder with London. So they don't have to comply with that because they're under contract with me through the flag with the Secretary of the Navy's office as a prize, which they've signed the lease with to create joinder with me as Postmaster General, Commander-in-Chief, and Muster Master on February 20th, 2003. The joinder between the Pentagon and the Vatican dealt with the usury of the hieroglyphics. So when you walk into and you look at the flag standards on top of the flags, and you look at the hieroglyphics when you walk into the Pentagon, they were the same joinder symbolizations, or symbols of what you see flying at the Vatican in Rome. Okay, so when you look down at Rome, I am a keymaster at the Vatican. On June 16th, 2003, I became keymaster of the Vatican, and I also had in a tactical move on that, I had a key holder position. I had a female in there with me as well, so we were keymaster to key holder until she vacated and put me in open gate and closed gate scenario for keys, moving commerce and energy through the ley lines. So what that means is when you look at the Vatican and you look down at the Vatican, you'll see a symbol of what you see as a keyhole, but it's also the symbol of a womb, of a female's womb. You have the phalanx in the middle of that, which is the male sex organ for copulation. And so on specific dates, as this vessel Earth casts shadows between the sun and the moon, they do ceremonial things because it casts a direct line shadow through that phallus into the keyholes through the doors there at the Vatican, sort of similar to what you would see on the Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it goes right over the Pope's chair and splits 2 keyholes. Now the unique thing about the Vatican, as well as the U.S. Supreme Court, is the keyholes are on the inside to lock the people in. So when you go up to the doors, you can't see any keyholes. But when you go inside of it, they have it all locked in so that you can't get out of their illusion. So I've sat down with the cardinals, had a conversation on that. Also a very interesting thing on the compass rose and the different hieroglyphics that come into St. Peter's Basilica. They have their gargoyles with holding the sands of time in suspension of neutrality, because there is no time. At that point they do away with the time. So they capture the time, so they stay in control of it. So these are symbolisms that I've sat down with the Angelo Sedano and the cardinals over there, had deep discussions with about. This is why I am the keymaster of the Vatican. And I capture the calendar, and there is no capacity for them to use their commerce against the citizens of this planet. And so this is why I'm putting this documentary out here, to give the citizens closure that there's a system in play that they can use and that they can function within and have freedom and autonomousness with. Yeah, that's it. But that's how they capture time with the Gregorian calendar, is through their obelisk triangulations and what they're doing there on that function, the keyhole womb. So as you look down at the Vatican and you see the phalanx and the womb and the keyhole looking thing, you also see the same symbolism when you look straight down at the Pentagon, or the same esoteric symbolism when you look down at Greenwich for the timelines, because they're all in the same shipping lanes. So they're all under the same esoteric symbolism for shipping. So I went to those locations. I mailed myself in those locations, and how I did it at the Vatican is I mailed the contract in there, and I gave them a call on the phone at 2 in the morning for 45 days. For 45 days, they spoke to me in Italian. At the end of the 45th day, I told them that I'm getting on the plane tomorrow, and I will be there in 3 days. Their words to me were, "We'll see you when you get here." So when I got there, I went to the post office and filed my contract under 3-day notice. When I came out of the post office, there was a nun waiting for my partner David Eifenwinkel Miller and myself, who told us she had been studying the quantum grammar for 5 years because we syntexed the Bible, proved it 100% fraud, and the Vatican was studying the correct Parse syntax grammar on all Bibles on planet Earth. And she said, "I'm come here to give you guys carte blanche to go anywhere you want in the Vatican." So they gave us a tour, and we got to go wherever we wanted at the Vatican and meet the people and talk about the grammar and the hieroglyphics of what we were seeing and what we had created. So that was very, very, very interesting and very neat. So I just wanted to add that caveat in here. When you look down at the Pentagon, and you look down at the same shipping lanes, ley lines, inside the Pentagon sits a post office, U.S. Post Office. But that post office is closed, for there's no authorization for the Pentagon to ship anything out of the Pentagon. And the reason why that is because I filed a contract in with them as Postmaster General, and they wouldn't freight forward the bills of the lading. Since they won't freight forward my bills of the lading, and I am the Postmaster General, I had to close the location, which I did. So they're functioning right now in fraudulent means, and they know it. And they don't have the power to move soldiers, they don't have the power to move contracts, they don't have the power to do anything. They have the trickery of planet Earth because they haven't told anybody the truth, but they don't have correctness. So the way that they're conducting contract on this now, or in this now space, is wrong. But before I came along, London controlled the money, the Vatican controlled the time through the Gregorian calendar, And the Pentagon was the enforcement of those contracts, of the time and the money. But since I disqualified London through fraudulent grammar, and since I disqualified the Vatican through keymaster, key holder mechanics, and since I am the Commander-in-Chief of the Pentagon, where I have the flag and I am the Postmaster General, all of those locations do not have authorization to harvest we the people of this planet, providing people of this planet have claims of the life and function in correct communication, parsing, syntax, grammar. In this documentary, you will witness my former corporate partner, David-Wincole Miller, give closure on how the grammar works.